Survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse and the American public are still awaiting the full release of the Epstein case files. After moments of delay, President Trump signed a bill passed nearly unanimously by Congress into law last week that compels the Justice Department to make those materials public within 30 days. Joining us now to discuss this and more is Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. He is the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. Hi, Congressman. Thank you for coming on the show. So first off, do you have any updates on when the Justice Department plans to release the Epstein files?
No updates, but we are fully expecting and demanding complete disclosure of the Epstein files, just with the names of victims redacted where it's appropriate.
I want to ask you about Democratic Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett. Last week, as you know, there was a failed censure effort over her text with Epstein during an oversight hearing in 2019. He was a known sex offender. She acknowledged Epstein's influence in her line of questioning during that hearing on this show when we had her on, but would not say it was an error in judgment. Here's how you defended her on the House floor last week, so our viewers can listen.
However ill-advised it may have been, she took a phone call from one of her constituents. They've arraigned a Democratic member for taking a phone call from her constituent, Jeffrey Epstein, in the middle of a hearing. And of course, I don't think there's any rule here against taking phone calls in a hearing.
And to be clear, she initiated the text chain on that day. But are Democrats losing the moral high ground on the Epstein issue by defending her as you have?
Well, look, we've been demanding a complete release of the file, and now they wanted to discipline her, censure her, because she'd engaged in that text exchange with a convicted criminal. Of course, our Republican colleagues engage in text exchanges all the time with Donald Trump, who has 34 felony criminal offenses to his name. So I don't know exactly what she's being charged with there. My point was simply she had not violated the Constitution, she had not violated federal law, and she had not violated, to my knowledge, any rule of the House of Representatives. Look, we're not afraid of anything that's in the Epstein files, and we want to see justice done for the survivors. That's what this is about. We want to see the truth come out, and it's the Republicans who are running around trying to figure out who's in there and who's going to be implicated, and that's not our approach to it. But Stacey Plaskett obviously didn't violate any law, or they didn't even allege that she violated a rule of the House of Representatives. What rule did she violate? People text and email and call us all the time. I mean, do I have anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein? No. And, you know, it's unfortunate that he's got some people's phone numbers, but he's no longer with us. The point now is, can we do justice for the victims and the survivors of this nightmare? Because we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of crimes that were committed, if not thousands of crimes that were committed by a billion-dollar enterprise.
Yeah, and we've had many victims on, and we've been very focused on that. Just to be clear, that use the example of the president. Texting with the president of the United States is different than a pedophile, right? I mean, Jeffrey Epstein was more than just a constituent. He was, hold on, let me just finish. He was a known sex offender. He was also a donor, right? He was a donor. And Stacey Plaskett, in her deposition in 2023, acknowledged she went to Epstein's New York home to solicit money for the Democratic Party in 2018. So I guess my question for you is, I know you have a relationship with her. You were an impeachment manager with her, right? But if this were a Republican in the same situation, would you still excuse it?
Well, in other words, are you saying, would I want to censure someone just because they had a phone call with a convicted felon and an adjudicated sex assailant? Because that's what Donald Trump is. Remember, he's got an adjudicated sexual assault charge in New York that he was convicted of, in addition to the 34 criminal felonies. So I'm not quite sure what your point is here. Should we be censuring anybody who's on a phone call with a felon?
Well, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying, would you be defending a Republican who was in the same position, texting with Jeffrey Epstein?
I did.
Texting with Jeffrey Epstein after he was a known convicted sex offender, and just be calling it a constituent when in fact he was a donor and there was more there.
Well, I mean, we could take the example of the Republican serial liar and fraudster from New York. I'm spacing his name out right now, who left Congress, who was just
George
pardoned
Santos?
by.
Is that what you're talking about, George Santos?
George Santos.
Okay.
Yeah, I defended George Santos. They wanted to expel him because they considered him inconvenient, but he had not had a criminal conviction, he'd not had a civil conviction, and he'd not gone through the ethics process. And that was my whole point with Stacey Plaskett. If you think she's violated a federal law or a rule of the House, charge her with it and let's take it through the ethics committee. But she hadn't been charged with anything. That was my simple point. And I know the Republicans are saying the Democrats defended Stacey Plaskett with respect to Jeffrey Epstein. We did not. We said we need to have a process here. She's not charged criminally. She's not charged civilly, and you haven't lodged any ethics complaint against her. And I said the exact same thing with George Santos. And you can go back and see that I voted not to expel him because there was no process.
So just to be clear, you weren't defending her in that text exchange.
I'm sorry, I was not morally defending her. Like I said, Jeffrey Epstein never had my phone number. I would never give it to him. But that's not the standard, whether or not we censure someone and use the disciplinary process in Congress against them. So that's just Republican propaganda.
Okay,
I mean, they understood exactly what they were saying.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask you about that, because that had gotten a lot of play and Republicans had been talking about that and saying that there's a double standard. And obviously you have been on the forefront of the Epstein issue, wanting to release the files in recent months. I'm just wondering, the reality is, you say, we're not afraid of anything, but the reality is a lot more could come out when these files, if and when these files are released to the public, right? For Republicans and for Democrats, right? Jeffrey Epstein was a donor to both parties. Are Democrats having discussions about how to handle that if more members of your party are embroiled in anything having to do with Epstein?
I literally have not had one Democrat in the House or the Senate or, a former administrative official come to us and say, hey, you better slow down. That might embarrass one of our people. I mean, Larry Summers has had to resign from a whole bunch of boards and is apparently saying he's ashamed and disgraced by what's come out. Well, then that was a decision that he made. And, we hold no brief for him. Nobody should be involved with $1 billion international global child sex trafficking ring. If, you listen to the survivors on your show, for example, people will know that the people involved in that were guilty of some very gruesome actions. And so to the extent that people are involved in it, they're going to have to own up to it. And if there are continuing crimes that have gone on or other crimes that weren't prosecuted, that should be part of this process. But remember, it was the Trump Department of Justice that summoned all the materials, took the case away from Maureen Comey in New York, and then they killed the investigation in February. They said there's nothing left to see here, and it's only because we've demanded the release of the files that it's possible that there will be more justice done when, discoveries are made about whether there was abuse and rape that took place and trafficking of other individuals. But remember, the Trump Justice Department tried to kill it.
Yeah, no, you're right. They did release that memo saying there's nothing here. Jeffrey Epstein died by suicide. There's no client list. But just to follow up, even if no one in the Democratic Party is implicated in being part of Epstein's ring, if there are more communications that come out, right? I mean, are there any discussions about how to handle that? Because we've already seen the fallout from that with other Democrats and Epstein.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know what to say about it. It's a sign of the times here that everything is viewed through such a partisan lens. I mean, if there are people involved with a child sex abuse trafficker, if they committed crimes, then they should be investigated and prosecuted with all the protections of due process. And if they were just involved in some kind of social relationship or whatever, people can figure that out. I mean, that was the whole point about Stacey Plaskett. For some reason, he had Stacey's phone number. They'd been in communication. And so she takes the hit for that publicly, that they communicated, but nobody's accusing her of having committed a crime. and nobody's accusing her of violating a rule of ethics. It's not against our ethics rules for people to get texts in Congress. So the whole point of the rule of law is that we can make these kinds of distinctions, and they shouldn't be difficult to make. There's a difference between, flying to Jeffrey Epstein's island and engaging in sexual abuse of minors, and then somebody getting, a phone call or a text.
Right, and as you know, Congressman, you've been in Washington a long time. There's the legal aspect, right, and then there's the politics of it, right, and those are two separate issues. Congressman Jamie Raskin, thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a nice Thanksgiving.
Yes, indeed. Happy Thanksgiving.